All right, on Saturday, as I played that clip, it was hard to hear, but President Biden finally referred to the situation at the southern border as a crisis. But the White House is trying to reframe his words, saying instead the president was referring to the crisis in Central America. Here is the White House press secretary earlier today.
The president does not feel that children coming to our border seeking refuge from violence, economic hardships, and other dire circumstances is a crisis.
So, according to the White House, there is no crisis at the border, but only below the border. Is that so? With me now to talk about the president's comments as well as the decision to pull U.S. troops out of Afghanistan is Congressman Mike Waltz, who is a colonel in the National Guard, a combat decorated Green Beret, former White House and Pentagon policy advisor, and a member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, good to be with you.
So, Congressman, let me start with this. So who's speaking for the White House, the president or the press secretary?
Yeah, that's a great question. And who's speaking for the American people that live along that border? Who's speaking for the estimated 30 to 40% of young girls who are sexually assaulted on that journey that President Biden's policies are incentivizing people to make? I think those are all good questions. Who's speaking for our veterans that aren't getting the services that they have rightfully earned, our school systems, our roads, our bridges, all of which will be taxed by this influx of what some estimates are saying could be millions of people if these policies don't change.
You know, I'm going to talk about this a little later in the program. Larry Taunton, who was just down in Central America, but many of these people who are coming to this country are fleeing socialist policies, the very thing that we see the Democratic Party in this country pushing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. They want you to believe that they're fleeing climate change. And yes, the Central America did get hit by 2 hurricanes, but really what it is a corrupt socialist governments who can't effectively respond and can't help their people, and economies that have been devastated by left-wing policies now for years. That's really what the issue is. And you know, ultimately, when Biden comes in and says they're not going to deport anybody for the first 100 days, you no longer have to remain in Mexico while you wait for asylum claims, you no longer have to apply for asylum from your home country, as long as you get a tow in the United States, then basically you'll be taken care of and released into the interior with given a court date some years in the future to come back with. That's going to incentivize people to come, and that's exactly what we're seeing. I mean, this is a crisis of our own making, and that hard-nosed determination to not admit it for political reasons is just really truly disheartening.
Yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but on this particular issue, the contrast between the policies of the 2 administrations could not be sharper. As I've mentioned here on the program many times, I was at the border a little over a year ago, and it was like a ghost town. Now it's Grand Central Station, and it's all because of the differing policies of the 2 administrations.
And Tony, let me just say, you know, we're seeing it within the United States in terms of people fleeing policies of the left. I represent North Florida. We've got 1,000 people a day coming in from the Northeast, from California. I'm telling them all to leave their politics at the door. Yeah. But people are voting with their feet when it comes to these blue state left-wing policies. California is set to lose a representative due to the census and how many people are leaving for the first time in its history.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're seeing that in the demographic shifts across the country. And you talk about, and I know it was somewhat tongue in cheek, but there's some truth to that when you look at people who are fleeing these liberal policies of the Northeast and the West Coast. They got to leave those policies behind. But in particular, what is very destructive are many of these corporations that are fleeing these high tax places like New York and California and bringing their own left-leaning policies to states like Florida and Texas and elsewhere. That has to be watched very carefully.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the hypocrisy in corporate America right now, who wants to appear woke on the airwaves and protesting Georgia. But yet when it comes to taxes and overregulation or fleeing blue states to red states like Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, are willing to donate tens of millions to social justice causes in the United States, but turn a blind eye to the act of genocide that's going on in China that you and I have talked about. Right. The hypocrisy is just ridiculous.
Well, corporate America needs to understand the connection between the conservative fiscal policies and the conservative social policies that provide the foundation for economic growth in these states. That's why conservative states are growing economically. And so if these corporations want to continue to benefit from that environment, they got to leave the policies of these states, quit sticking their nose into these policies that simply protect the sanctity of human life, protect girls' sports, and you name it.
Right. That's absolutely right. At the end of the day, the Democrats' policies message very well. It's hard to compete with, I'll admit, because it's hard to compete with a four-letter word called free that gets people addicted to that government assistance. But their policies have never worked anywhere around the world. Eventually, you run out of other people's money, but they're looking to then supplement. People are fleeing those blue states, but now, you have hundreds of thousands of immigrants pouring across the border that the Democrats and the left hope will be their future voters. Right. And that's just a policy for disaster.
It's also hard to compete against a three-letter word, at least in the short-term lie. Because so often they don't even tell the truth about what they're doing. I want to transition to another foreign policy issue beyond our southern border, and that's to the announcement last week of the U.S. pulling all troops out of Afghanistan on September the 11th, that'll be complete by September the 11th.
Well, first of all, it's insulting to have this surrender on September 11th. That should be a solemn date only for the families of those victims and for the Gold Star families and veterans of so many other that brought justice to al-Qaeda, to the Taliban for September 11th. So that's tone deaf and insulting on the face of it. Here's the thing, Tony, this is repeating exactly what Obama did in Iraq, where he pulled our troops out too soon. We saw ISIS come roaring back, wreak devastation across the region, including hundreds of thousands of Christians that they persecuted, attacks across Europe, inspired attacks across the United States. The intelligence community is clear. The Afghan government is likely to fall in the wake of our withdrawal. Al-Qaeda will come roaring back, and we're going to find ourselves fighting our way back in. I get the frustration out there. Too hard, too long, too expensive. I wrote a book called Warrior Diplomat on the mistakes that we've made in Afghanistan. But at the end of the day, we need to stay on offense. We need to fight forward. I do not want to see attacks I do not want to see these terrorists following us home here in the United States, and a small presence focused on counterterrorism and continuing to train and mentor the Afghan army so that eventually they can take the fight completely on their own is the responsible policy. President Trump wanted us out too. I had a lot of conversations with him about it, but he was going to do it conditions-based. Only if the Taliban, really stepped up to their end of the bargain. Biden is saying no matter what, he's yanking everybody out, and that is a recipe for attacks right back here home. We need to be fighting this in places like Kabul, Kandahar, Damascus, not Kansas City, Orlando, San Bernardino.
Extremely important point. And our presence there is very limited, about 2,500 troops, and it's a force multiplication effort by us being there working with the indigenous troops there to keep the terrorists at bay. So as you point out, isn't it better to make a small investment, even if it's a long-term investment there in that country, rather than battling them here on our own soil?
Yeah, it's an insurance policy against not having attacks at home. And I want to be clear, because this isn't really understood. The Afghans are doing the vast majority of the fighting. We're there providing critical support, like intelligence, like air support, like logistics. But we do have a small force there of special operators ready to take unilateral action if we need to. And importantly, Tony, when the military goes, the CIA will go with them, and then we're going to be blind. So the Biden administration is going to convince you that we can do what they are calling over the horizon counterterrorism. I think they've read too many Tom Clancy books. I could tell you as a Green Beret, that's not how it works. You have to have folks on the ground running sources, informants, having active intelligence, and being ready to keep pressure and our foot on the neck of these terrorist groups.
Congressman, if I'm not mistaken, you're the only Green Beret that has served in Congress and currently serving, and you've spoken out on these issues, and we're going to talk more about that later, but very quickly, you've reached out to Secretary Blinken. Any response from him? Zero
response, and we've even reached out from a human rights perspective as well. The Afghan parliament sets aside 25% of its seats for women that have been brutalized by the Taliban. They are in a state of panic right now. I just spoke to some of the female Afghan negotiators.
Congressman, we got to leave it. We're out of time.
Afraid.
We got to leave it there.